Talked about connecting the dots and things like that. So,
hmm
how has that worked for you in terms of bringing empathy into the equation?
Well, as you know full well, empathy is really the secret superpower of marketers to be successful, to really empathize with your ideal customers and clients as people, as human beings, right? What are their goals? What are their fears? What are their values? And that's always been present. I never really called it empathy before, but I didn't realize how much that had helped me in my career and also helped me with my clients. That work kind of led into helping people understand the power of empathy as a strategic advantage. And so, as you know, with brand, it's really about seeing things from the perspective of your customer so you can not only remove friction or improve the process or improve the buying experience, but also so you can ask and echo back what's in their hearts, what's in their minds, being able to connect with them and use the words that they use to describe the problem and to describe the solution they seek or the ideal state that they seek. That really requires empathy.
Welcome to the Turbo Branding Show, where we help you ignite your growth by leveraging your brand to grow faster, easier, and more successfully. I'm your host, Sue Kirshner, and today I'm welcoming Maria Ross to the show. So let's delve into today's episode and turbocharge your brand. First, thank you so much for being here, Maria. I'm so excited to have you here.
I know, I'm so excited too. This is going to be such a great talk.
Yeah. So let me kick it off by saying when it comes to brand strategy and how small businesses can create and leverage a strong brand, you and I are absolutely on the same page. So
hmm
I'm really looking forward to hearing more about your process for brand building, as well as the important role that empathy plays in all of that. So,
hmm
but before we jump into the juicy questions and discussions, let me read or share a little bit about how you are the expert in this space. So, Maria Ross is a speaker, facilitator, author, strategist, and empathy advocate who believes cash flow, creativity, and compassion are not mutually exclusive. She's spent decades helping forward-thinking leaders, teams, and brands connect and engage through empathy to accelerate growth. She's authored multiple books, including her latest, The Empathy Dilemma: How Successful Leaders Balance Performance, People, and Personal Boundaries. But her previous book, The Empathy Edge, sparked a movement, and now she hosts the top-rated The Empathy Edge podcast on how to achieve radical success through empathy. I love that, radical success. I'm gonna ask you about that later. But just to finalize here, Maria delivers powerful talks of leadership training and workshops for companies, and you've definitely delivered keynotes at all kinds of venues like TEDx to New York Times to the 3% conference. So, woo, that's an amazing bio for you there.
Thanks.
Excellent. So, all right. So I'm going to ask a couple more questions so you can tell us more about you
hmm
personally before we jump into our main topic of branding and empathy. So, Maria, what is your superpower? What are you an expert in?
I love this question. I feel like I'm an expert in connecting the dots for people, and I should emphasize for other people, not always for
Yes.
myself.
Oh,
But
let us emphasize that entirely. Yes.
yeah, I mean, it's like the cobbler's kids have no shoes half the time,
Yep.
right? Like for
Yep.
your own work and your own business. But whether it's my brand work or the work I'm doing now around helping leaders and teams and brands embrace empathy, it's really about being that impartial observer and helping people see how things and concepts and people are related and connected. And I really brought this forth when I was doing my brand work, conducting brand strategy workshops, where I'd bring in a cross functional team, not just the marketing team, because I wanted to get a 360-degree view of the customer and the product and the business and the culture.
Yeah.
And it was always about helping people understand how they weren't so far apart as they thought they were
Mm.
and helping them connect and build that bridge. And it's kind of, you probably know this too. It's very similar with brand work. It's helping entrepreneurs or companies take these disconnected ideas
Right.
and personas and put it together under one brand umbrella that makes sense to people, that gets people excited. So I would say I'm kind of a dot connector.
Yeah, I like that. I say sometimes that, yeah, I love puzzles, right? And so
Yeah.
it's very similar to that is I
hmm
love with my clients is you get to know the client, then you talk to their employees, then you talk to their top customers or any other stakeholders, and you put all the little pieces together to kind of
hmm
create this, well, what is my brand? What are we amazing at? And how can we
Right.
deliver on that constantly? So yes, I hear you on that. I love that is your superpower. So tell me a little bit more then. So you talked about connecting the dots and things like that. So
Hmm.
how has that worked for you in terms of bringing empathy into the equation, which that
Hmm.
is obviously, the movement that you've been able to.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah, well, as you know full well, empathy is really the secret superpower of marketers to be successful, to really empathize with your ideal customers and clients as people, as human beings, right?
right,
What are their goals? What are their fears? What are their values? And that's always been present. I never really called it empathy before, but I didn't realize how much that had helped me in my career and also helped me with my clients.
right.
And that work kind of led into helping people understand the power of empathy as a strategic advantage. And so, as you know, with brand, it's really about seeing things from the perspective of your customer so you can not only remove friction or improve the process or improve the buying experience, but also so you can ask and echo back what's in their hearts, what's in their minds, even if you're doing a B2B sale,
Hmm.
being able to connect with them and use the words that they use to describe the problem and to describe the solution they seek or the ideal state that they seek, that really requires empathy. And so that for me was how I connected those dots between the work I was doing as a brand strategist and as a marketer
Hmm.
into the work I'm doing now. And then because you and I have talked about this before, brand and culture are two sides of the same coin.
Yes.
And so it's not just enough to have this amazing brand story and brand image that you present to the outside world, but what are you doing on the inside to practice empathy with each other and better collaborate and better innovate and better engage your internal stakeholders just as much as your external customers?
Yeah. No, you're right. Because, and this is something I talk to my clients about, building on what you just said is, especially in service businesses, but really any business, your people are your brand ambassadors, right? They are the ones who are at the end of every touch point they have with a customer where they can either make or break that brand promise. And
Hmm.
so many companies, they don't take the time to even explain what the brand is or what that looks like on a day-to-day basis for the people who are supposed to deliver on it.
Hmm.
So it is essentially important to not only, like
Yeah,
you said, have the empathy for the customers, but also empathy for the internal employees to kind of say, all right, well, let me walk in their shoes during the day and then say, wow, they should have known that this was a key brand promise that we're trying to deliver on, or they
yeah,
should have said these types of messages when someone
right.
asked them this question and things like that. And that often it gets ignored and it shouldn't because your people are your best brand ambassadors.
Yeah, they're the ones that have to live out the brand exactly like you said. They're your
Yeah.
brand evangelists.
Yeah.
And also it's about helping them understand how they, like you said, live out the brand every day. But what happens so often is that just the marketing department owns
Mhm.
brand.
Yeah.
And they're doing all this stuff externally. And then meanwhile, there's a culture going on there.
Yeah.
There's a vibe and a personality and a brand promise being delivered internally. Are those in sync?
Yeah.
And that's really where I get to, trying to help my clients understand that you can you can present whatever you want to the world, but are you actually walking your talk on
Right.
the inside?
Right. And leadership is the steward of that walking the talk,
100%. Right.
right? So
Right.
I'm going to share, because I want to hear your stories on empathy and how that shows up in the branding process. So this was something that I'm going to date myself, but back in the 80s, when I was getting my master's at Kellogg, we had a professor come in to speak, and I wish I could remember her name, but I can't, but she wrote this book called The Sweet Spot.
Hmm.
And it was all about positioning your products to hit the sweet spot of what the customer. And obviously, you need to understand the customer in order to understand what their sweet spot is going to be in terms of positioning. So she told this story that I thought was brilliant and stuck with me forever. She did some work with Hewlett Packard way back
Hmm.
when home computers were starting to be the thing, right?
Hmm.
So she said she went on a customer call with the engineers for someone, it was a mom with children who had just bought a home computer, HP,
Uh-huh.
and she went with the engineers into the house and just had to sit and watch this mom set up the computer.
Right.
And the whole time she said the engineer was shaking because they wanted to say something and they wanted to say, do this. Why are you
Right.
doing that? And she's like, we had to make sure the engineer sat there and was very quiet and just said, this is what people are experiencing when they pull your product out of the box. How are you going to fix that and make it better?
Yeah.
And she was like,
Oh,
that was it. That was the empathy because we talk a lot about walk in your customer's shoes, or as we just alluded to, walk in your employee's shoes. But how do you do that? And this was, I thought, an amazing example of show them how people are actually using the product or the service. So I don't know if you have any like really, cool stories of how empathy,
yeah.
has played into helping with, brand positioning
Yeah.
or even just understanding and creating a target market persona even for your business.
Yeah. I mean, I love that. And I've actually had some sort of brand ethnographers that do that kind of in-house research, in
Yeah.
situation research on the Empathy Edge podcast to talk about that. And I know that's not always feasible for every client, right? And so there's a way that I call it MacGyvering it because you're sort
Okay.
of just like, what can you do? Even just if you have 3 to 5 qualitative calls
Mm,
with customers that you love, it's sort of like if you could replicate that customer, 1,000 times, they would be the perfect customer for you. They're kind of in your sweet spot as a company.
right.
And if you just even talk to them for a half an hour and not in a survey, not in a,
Right.
what did you think of your customer service experience? Like of the last, I love the ones that go, based on the last person you talked to. Well, hopefully the last person I talked to solved my problem. And so I'm going to say, yeah, it was great. But
Yeah.
what about the whole journey to get to that person, right?
Right. Right.
But even just talking to them and asking open-ended questions, because that's what I do with my clients. I know you do this too, where it's like,
Right.
just give me the list. I'm going to go talk to them. I'm going to set up a half an hour meeting. This is costing you not a lot of money to just do
Right.
this. You don't have to do a $100,000 focus group exercise, and
Right.
just say, what are your biggest problems right now?
Hmm.
What are your biggest challenges? How do you solve those challenges now? What are you looking to achieve?
Right.
And when it comes to the brand of the company, how do you describe what they do? How
Right.
do you interact with the product or the service? What would you tell your friends or your peers about it? You get
Exactly.
so much information just in 30 minutes that gives
Yeah.
you a new perspective. And, it's funny because back at the beginning of my career, I did change management consulting for one of the big 6 consulting
Okay.
firms.
Okay.
And I was the voice of the people in that change process. I did training and communication planning. And to your story, I was working alongside engineers and programmers who were designing the systems that we were implementing. And change management at the time, dating myself, was fairly new, is like,
Yeah.
oh, yeah, we need people to work on helping people adopt this new technology.
Right.
The programmers and the engineers would design stuff and we would be creating training for it. And we would have to sit alongside them and go, how are they supposed to do this on this screen? And they would say, oh, they have to click command and this and and then do a shift button. I was like, how are they supposed to know that?
Yeah.
And they're like, well, you tell them. It's like, great, but you're not going to be sitting there next to them while they're
Telling them.
using
Right.
the software, while they're using the application.
Right.
So how can you make this more intuitive for them? And so really getting them to think about how something is ultimately going to be used. And even if you think about that, you may not always get it right. So you
Hmm.
really have to get into the trenches. You have to observe, you have to ask, you have to be open to tweaking and tuning
Yeah.
and not have so much ego into it of like, well, they're just too stupid to figure it out, which is usually the answer you get.
Right.
No, if you want someone to adopt your product or your service, you've got to make it as easy as possible for them
Yes.
to embrace it and to bring it in. And just to add to another story that I shared in the Empathy Edge, I spoke to someone who worked very closely with Steve Jobs back
Mhm.
in the early days of Apple. And he had a reputation for not necessarily being the most empathetic leader.
Yeah.
But when it came to customers, when it came to users, he was rabidly
Mm.
empathetic to the
Okay.
point that he would pour over emails or things in, I don't even know what they're called anymore, list chats or list serves,
Oh,
whatever,
okay.
but
Yeah.
back in the day,
Yeah.
and find out what they thought about things and how they were able to accomplish the goals they had. And that was the mindset he used to make Apple Apple, and
Mm.
to say, this is not just about their interaction with our product. This is about who they want to be
Mm.
and what they want to achieve. And that's a tremendous amount of empathy for the user. So I'm kind of going off on a tangent here a little bit, but
No, I love
it's
it.
that idea of the leaders and the companies and the professionals who take that time create legacy products, create legacy brands. And it's not a step that can just be skipped, but also to know it doesn't have to be super expensive.
Right. No, you're right. And yeah, I agree 100% with that. And I love what you said about Steve Jobs and building off of what you were talking about with the, you and I could talk forever about, oh,
I know, I
what
know.
questions do you ask people and customers and things like that? And
Yeah.
yeah, you're right. I mean, I've had some clients in the past go, oh, well, we'll just send a survey out. I'm like, no, you will never get at the brand if you're
Hmm.
just sending a survey out. It's fine for customer satisfaction, as you mentioned earlier, but to
Hmm.
get at the brand, you have to actively listen. And you
Hmm.
have to, if they say something intriguing, you have to go off on that,
Yeah.
find out where it came from and things like that. And the other thing too I talk about is when I do the question for the customers is again, I'm not here to find out what you're bad at. I'm here to find out what you're amazing at because we want to build on it and replicate it more in the
Hmm.
future, right?
Yeah.
And one of my favorite questions I love to ask too is, especially for customers who have just maybe started working with the client and all this, to say, what did they say in the sales process that
Yeah.
made think, oh my gosh, they are the right fit to help us with our challenge. And I
Hmm.
love to have them spit back, what was it that you heard that they could do for you?
Right.
Difference.
Or even what they thought, right? I love to ask that question of when you were considering other solutions, what made you choose this one? And sometimes you'll get great answers that are like, yes, and they've continued to deliver that. Or I chose them because I thought they were going to make this promise. And I have to be honest, they're not really living up to that promise. That's information you want to know
Yeah.
so you don't ignore it. Because then what happens at the time that they, let's say it's a SaaS product and they have to renew, you
Yeah.
want to make sure you get that renewal.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So tell me a little bit more about how did you kind of transition moving into the empathy leadership space?
Yeah.
And did that change your customer base at all? Or not really?
No, it totally did. I had to go through my own rebranding effort. And, I should add, I still do the branding work. I'm just very, very selective on who I choose. And I really want to make sure it's a company that's embracing empathy as a value. But yeah, I had to, what is it? They say eat your own dog food, drink
Oh
your own
yeah.
Kool-Aid is probably a
Drink
better,
your
a
own
better
Kool-Aid.
term.
Yeah.
Yeah. But I had to go through my own rebranding process.
Yeah.
And it was really challenging. And that's why you have to get outside help.
Yes.
You are too close to it. And I
Right.
worked with an amazing brand design firm and an amazing writer to help me get some distance and get some perspective. And I think, probably you could probably say this too. One of the biggest values that we can provide as brand strategists, it's not
Hmm.
necessarily rocket science. We're pulling things out of
Pulling
people,
it out.
but
Right.
it's that external perspective. That's the biggest value I feel like we offer to people.
Right.
And so I had to go through a rebranding process because now I was talking to HR leaders. I was talking to heads of culture and employee experience and customer experience and areas that I hadn't really touched before. I was mostly dealing with CMOs, heads of marketing, brand
Mhm.
directors. That's how I was being brought in to those projects.
Right.
And like I said, then opening the aperture up to make sure that we had representation from other groups within the company, but including HR. I would always make them have someone from HR sit in, to your
Yeah.
point earlier about because the people you bring in have to be good brand ambassadors for your brand.
Right. Right.
But yeah, I had to start targeting a different audience. And I built up my reputation as a brand strategist for well over a decade,
Hmm.
if not just from my corporate career prior to that. So it was a different move. But for me, again, being able to create the umbrella brand of connecting the dot of empathy is a lever that enables you to build a strong brand and connect and engage with your customers.
Hmm.
And that same lever to be able to connect and engage will help you as a leader to connect and engage your teams and your constituents and your stakeholders. So for me, it was a natural bridge. But again, being too close to it, I had to work with someone else to articulate how I connected that dot.
So you touched on this a little bit, what does empathy at work really mean and things like that. But are there myths or misperceptions around empathy that you have to combat when you're talking with your clients?
Yeah, absolutely. And, it's funny because this also applies to the myths that we have around how we treat customers as
Mm,
well, right?
okay.
So, empathy is not just about being nice. You can be really nice, but it doesn't mean
Absolutely.
you see my point of view and you're leveraging my point of view to take a next right step with me, right? Whether that's, oh, here's how we can find a solution together, or here's how we can find common ground, or maybe, when I'm able to see and understand your perspective,
Hmm.
I can decide what to do next, right? And from a
Right.
customer service standpoint, that could be just letting you vent. That could be just acknowledging your pain.
Yeah.
I don't necessarily have to solve your problem, but I can be there for you, right? And sometimes
Yep.
that's the appropriate response for an employee and a customer. So it's not just about being nice because you could be nice, but it doesn't mean you're understanding me or you're acknowledging my point of view.
Right.
It's also not caving into unreasonable demands. And this is where, for employees, it doesn't mean you give employees everything they want and that you let them walk all over you, but it's also the same for customers.
Yeah.
The customer is not always right. The customer is always to be respected, but the customer's not always right. And if you
Mhm.
have a policy or a procedure, you want to be as empathetic as possible to their pain and try to find a solution that will help them. But you also have to be strong enough to say, this is actually not our policy. What else can we do for you?
Right.
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 So I think that often gets interpreted as like the customer can walk all over you. And that's not really a great, healthy relationship either.
Right.
So, and it's also not agreeing with people. So, again, from an employee perspective, an internal perspective, I can be empathetic. Sue, you and I could be having a budget debate internally, right? Or between
Right.
marketing and sales, right?
Right.
That's a great
Exactly.
classic
As
conflict.
we've all been in those kinds of
Yes,
meetings.
exactly. And
Yes.
I can understand your point of view, and maybe we can find a solution together that benefits both of us, but it doesn't mean I have to agree
Right.
with what your point of view is. But I can listen and I can get
Right.
curious and I can try to understand where you're coming from and say, oh, I see why you would think that. I still don't agree with it, but I see why you think that. So maybe we can find another option that I hadn't thought of before.
Right.
But again, and how you can see it from a customer's perspective is I could be a customer service rep or I could be a sales rep, and I don't agree with what the customer's asking for. They're asking for the moon and I don't agree with it, but I'm like, I really understand why you think that's important. I really understand why that's something that is causing a lot of friction.
Okay.
Here's all we can do about that right now.
Okay. Yeah. Excellent. Yeah, I listened to recently one of your more recent podcasts, and it was on Stoic empathy. So
Yes.
yeah, I liked that a lot. If
Yeah.
I'm gonna tell all the readers to, or all of my listeners to go listen to that one because it
Yeah.
was it was excellent on,
Yeah.
yeah, just how can you
Charmaine
have
Cruz wrote a book
empathy?
called Stoic Empathy. And
Yeah.
yeah, she was my guest for that one.
Yeah, and she's number one, fantastic guest. She really shared a lot of insights and things like that. But it was interesting, this whole dichotomy between, empathy and like you were talking about emotional and agreeing and being nice versus the more stoic side of no, there's a reason or there's rationality,
Right.
around empathy and things like that. So,
Right.
all right. Well, again, I could talk to you all day about this because I enjoy it so much. But I'm going to ask you one last question before we go. To help me honor a small business that is just absolutely doing a fantastic job with branding, could you give someone a shout out?
I would love to give someone a shout out. So I'm going to give a shout out to my girl, Carrie. And she is the owner of a sugaring studio in the San Francisco area, in the Bay, right in the Bay Area, called Habit. And I unfortunately moved away from the Bay Area last summer, but I still keep in touch with her. And I probably saw her for more than like 20 years off and on. And her business is I've always loved the vibe. I've always loved the personality. And she has grown and has been booked up solid
Hmm.
without spending any really money in advertising or
Oh,
playing the Instagram game
yeah.
or doing any of that stuff. And I love her philosophy because she's very much about being anti-trend. Like that
Okay.
is her vibe, right?
Okay.
There's no reels, there's no influencers. They are a trusted brand built with taste. And that
Nice.
is totally her vibe. It's also about reputation. So
Okay.
like I said, she doesn't do a lot of advertising and marketing, but because she's built up such a strong reputation, both in experience and in the
Hmm.
aesthetic of her studio
Okay.
and her experience, I asked her for some words because I knew how I would describe it, but understated, unexpected, and textural, like having a favorite
Ooh.
aunt that never married
Wow.
or had kids, right? It's that vibe. That everything
Okay.
in her studio is eclectic and artsy and a little bit romantic. There's like a almost like a European chic vibe, but without being stuffy or
Mhm.
overinflated,
Yeah.
not being a cold spa. It's almost like you're going into like the best quality vintage store you've ever been in, right? Even the
Love it.
music she plays during your service is so aligned. And that's how she's built up this reputation
Yeah.
for so many years and why people are so loyal to her. And I love her story because it shows that there's no magic formula. It's
Okay.
not about how much you post on Facebook. It's not about what trends you're chasing on Instagram. It's not even necessarily about how much money you spend.
Yeah.
She is a higher end product and service,
Uh-huh.
but it comes across as very approachable. And she's not, from a business perspective, she's not wasting a lot of money in places that are not going to buy her anything more
Hmm.
around the brand that she's built.
Right.
So, to those people who say, my company's too small, my business is too small, I can't invest in brand because I can't invest in advertising or I don't have time to do social media. Again, brand is reputation. It's not what you say, it's what others say, but you are influencing that through your actions, through your words, and through your look and your feel. And
Yeah.
you can control all of those elements. And that's what I love so much about Habit. So if any woman or man is in the San Francisco Bay Area, it's sugaring hair removal. And her people are, she always says, we're not a training ground here, no
Hmm.
rookies. Like this
Yeah.
is, this is experienced people. It's such an amazing experience. And I just love the vibe. So she
Wow.
is always someone that comes to mind for me when I think of a small brand and a small business doing things right.
I love that. Man, I want you to do my advertising because that's just a fantastic
It's
shout out.
phenomenal. It's
It's
phenomenal.
fantastic
Yeah.
shout out. But yeah, you're right.
It's
I
great.
mean, branding, it's the culmination of your messaging and your experience. And they don't
Yeah.
have to be 50%. You could have the experience be like 90% of the brand. And
Yeah.
obviously, she has done an amazing job on the experience side.
Yeah. I always talk about brand, you express your brand visually, verbally, and experientially. And
Yes.
visually and verbally is, how it looks and how it sounds. So
Yes.
everything from your colors to your fonts to your design aesthetic. And then verbally is how you talk, right? What
Yep.
is that personality?
Yep.
What is that voice that you have? And whatever works for you, just because, provocative and edgy works for one brand, it doesn't mean it works for you. It depends on
Exactly.
your ideal clients and customers.
Yeah.
But where the rubber hits the road on the visual and verbal, and this is the step where people fall off, you have to back up that
Right.
promise you've made visually and verbally with the experience itself.
Yes.
And this is why, again, Habit is such a great example because everything is well thought out, everything is intentional from
Yeah.
the way the studio's designed to the music that's played to the objects in the room to the website to all of it matches. All
Yeah.
of it is a consistent promise, and that
Yeah.
builds trust.
Absolutely builds trust. And I'm excited. I'm actually having a retail consultant come on in a couple episodes coming up here, and they're going to talk about exactly what she has excelled at, which is when you walk in the door, if you are if you're an organization that has a physical space,
Yeah.
what is the experience in the physical space? Like you talked about from the,
Yeah.
the aesthetic to the music to to the experience of the people in the room. I mean, all of that is
Yeah.
just, earth-shattering when it comes to building that brand and making it
It's
stand for
earth-shattering
something.
and yet also can be so easy and not super expensive if
Yeah,
people just take the time to take a step back and put some intentional thought into what is that vibe, what is that personality, what is that promise I'm trying
yeah,
to deliver, and
right,
what are all the possible touch points that can influence a customer. I
right.
need to make sure that truth is present in
Yeah,
every one of those touch points,
yeah,
from my automated email responders to my scheduling on my website to, what it's like when I check them out at the end of their transaction.
right. And to bring it full circle, it's the empathy That is to say, what is that person going to feel when they walk in the door, when they're on the
Yes,
website, and all of those things. So,
absolutely.
okay, amazing, amazing stuff. Thank you so much, Maria, for spending so much time with me today and sharing your insights on branding and empathy. But if people want to talk with you more about how they can leverage the skill of empathy, or find your books or have you speak, how do they find you?
Well, the easiest way is they can go to theempathyedge.com. That is actually a page on my site. It will take you to my podcast, but it also, like I said, it takes you to my site. So you can look at my services, you can see my books. I have free resources there, and people can sign up for my email newsletter. And if they go to the empathy dilemma
Yeah,
as a URL, which is also available that way, they can get a free chapter of the new book, The Empathy
excellent.
Dilemma.
Excellent. All
Yeah,
right, great. Well, again, thank you for being here. I would love to have you on again because I think we can talk about so many different topics,
for
but
sure.
I absolutely appreciate you being here today. So thank you, Maria.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah. And thank you for joining us for this episode of the Turbo Branding Show. I hope you've been inspired to ignite your growth by leveraging your brand. And if you enjoyed it, I hope you did, I'd love if you could help me build a strong brand following for the show. So please share this episode and be sure to like, subscribe, and leave a review. But thank you and stay tuned for our next episode.